Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking you along with us as we cook 3 delicious meals: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The only rule? They have to be made from scratch. That's right, no box meals this time. We're rolling up our sleeves and getting our hands dirty. Joining us is my son Robin, our resident scratch baking master. He's here to help us get out of any jams. Or is it to make jam? Anyway, go get your aprons. We're gonna make some memories. Let's get started. Starting the day off with a country classic, buttermilk biscuits and sausage gravy. We've set aside some ingredients here: half a cup of butter, along with 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of fine salt, 3½ cups of flour, and 1½ cups of cold buttermilk. Robin's going to start off making the biscuits by mixing together the dry ingredients. That's the baking powder, the sea salt, the cane sugar, giving those a nice little stir before adding in the butter. The butter is not melted, so it will take a little bit of extra work to get that diced up and mixed in finely. Robin did spend some time making this butter before the biscuits, so we'd have fresh homemade butter to go along with them. Now he's adding in the buttermilk before stirring all the ingredients together to make a nice dough. He's going to mix the dough a little bit more, but trying not to overmix it, matting it down to just under 1 inch in height. And then here's a pretty cool trick: using a ball jar to get even portion sizes for your biscuits. That way everybody gets about the same amount. Once he has all the biscuits pressed out, we're going to pop those in the oven just until they're lightly brown, which for us is about 14 minutes. While he's working on another batch of biscuits, I'm going to get started on the sausage gravy. I'm going to add in 1 pound of pork on medium heat and cook it through until it's brown. In hindsight, we should have bought 2 pounds of pork from the store so that I could double this gravy recipe, but we didn't, so we'll have to make do. Little bit of gravy for everybody. First batch of biscuits are out and they look amazing. We got to set aside some ingredients to put in the sausage gravy, so we'll go over what those are here really quick. We have 1 teaspoon of onion powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of mustard powder, 1½ teaspoons of oregano, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/4 cup of flour, and 2 cups of whole milk. Now we'll go back to our skillet and begin adding our dry seasonings into our pork. Growing up, biscuits and gravy was one of my favorite breakfast items, so this breakfast is very nostalgic for me. Throwback to my childhood. After we've added all of our dry seasonings, we will then add in our flour, and we're going to cook that flour in until it's lightly brown. Now as I'm lightly browning this flour, the next batch of biscuits has actually finished cooking, so I got to get out of the way here. Once those are set aside, we're going to pour in all 2 cups of milk all at the same time and stir that until it is our desired thickness. And once it hits that, we're going to pull it off the heat, and I'm going to add another ½ teaspoon of salt just for flavor. Now we have 9 kids at our household, 8 of which eat solid food, so I'm preparing 10 plates, including me and Mama, and I'm going to lightly dust each one of these biscuits with gravy, since we didn't have the foresight to buy enough sausage for a second batch. We're going to quickly get the family around the island to enjoy this breakfast, and then we're going to jump right into starting lunch if we want to get it done in time. Alright, breakfast is done, dishes are out of the way. It's time for homemade pizza. For it, we will need 6 tablespoons of melted butter, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 packet of yeast, 7 cups of flour, and 2½ cups of water. Robin gets the privilege of making all of our bread dough today. He's going to add the sugar and the yeast into the water and stir those together until he gets a nice bubble on top. Now we're going to mix the salt into the flour, pour in the butter, and then give that a nice stir before we add in our water yeast mixture. Now we're going to need to start on our white bread right after we get this pizza dough going so that it will be ready for dinner because it has a long rise. ahead of it. We're going to put some flour down on the table so the bread dough doesn't stick as much as we're kneading it. After that, we'll pour out the dough and start the kneading process. We've been making homemade pizza for quite a few years now, and it has become one of our household favorites. We even on occasion will make it for guests when they stop by, so if you come over, maybe we'll make you some. We're going to grease the pot before we toss the dough lump in there, and we're going to go ahead and roll that around and make sure it's nice and greasy before we cover it with a towel and set it aside to rise for 2 hours. For the white bread, we'll need a 1/4 cup of butter, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 packet of yeast, 6 cups of flour, and 2½ cups of water. We're going to prep the water for the flour a little differently for the white bread. First adding in just the yeast packet and stirring it. But then we're going to put the butter right into the water and start to stir that in. It's a little difficult and it won't completely melt, but just try to break it down as best you can. So after that butter has been melted in, we're going to pour in the salt and the sugar and give all that a good stir before adding it into the flour to make a dough. If you're enjoying this content so far, we would appreciate if you press the subscribe button. It will let you become notified whenever we post new videos, and it really does help out our channel. After the flour bread dough is ready, we're going to put down some base flour to keep it from sticking to the table and pour it out as we press it into a nice dough. Once we're happy with the consistency of our dough ball, we're going to once again grease the pan, place the dough inside, and turn it to make sure it's coated on all sides before covering and setting aside to double in size. And just like that, our pizza dough is ready to be divided into 4 semi-equal parts. After we've got those pieces separated, we're happy with the size, we'll set them out on the table, cover them with a towel for another hour rise, at which point they're ready. We will grease the pans and preheat the oven, as well as add a baking stone. You'll see us putting an upside down muffin pan in here. It's because we don't have a baking stone. We're using the muffin pan instead. Preheating that oven to 500 degrees, and now rolling out our pizza dough until we're happy with its size and shape. We like our pizza crusts pretty thin, which makes them on the flimsy side for picking up, but definitely good for eating. After Robin gets this pizza crust spread out on the pan, I'll step in here and get it sized to the pan more precisely with a little bit of hangover on the edge so that I can roll those edges into a nice crust. Now you can do a crust in a square, in a circle, or really any shape that you want to. As long as the thickness of the dough is pretty consistent, it's not going to affect the flavor. And we're actually going to do one of each. So we've got a square here and also a circle. We're going to add the sauce and also the cheese, and then we'll get that popped in the oven. I'm going to set the pizza on top of that muffin pan that I had set in there earlier, which is my makeshift pizza stone, setting a timer for 10 minutes, and this pizza will be done. After that timer is up, we'll pull this pizza out, and we'll put our second one in. Now we really like some extra flavor on our crust, so if you get a bowl with some melted butter, add in a teaspoon of onion powder, teaspoon of garlic powder, teaspoon of parsley, and a teaspoon of salt. You can brush that on your crust to really enhance the flavor. We highly recommend it. And this pizza was a success. Alright, let's move on to dinner. Pulling back out that dough ball from earlier that we're going to make our bread with, we did forget to record it, but we pulled it out after it doubled in size, punched it down, let it rise again. So now we're pulling it out and greasing 2 pans, separating them into pretty equal portions, and popping those in those bread pans, covering them again for a final rise before they go in the oven. To go along with that bread for dinner, we're making a cheesy bacon and potato soup. So we're dicing up 1 large onion, placing that in a large pot, and now we'll dice up 2 celery ribs to go on that pot along with those onions. And now it's time to fry up some bacon. Don't make the same mistake that I made. Make sure your bacon is nice and crispy before you pull it out of the pot. After it's out, you can pour in the grease into the celery and onions and cook those until softened. I didn't cook my bacon quite long enough, and the texture just wasn't very pleasing in that potato soup. We set aside 8 potatoes, skinned them, and then diced them into cubes. At this point, we can add our crispy bacon into our celery and onions. Hopefully yours is crispier than mine. And then take those cubed potatoes and put those in as well. After the potatoes, we poured in 1 container of chicken broth, brought the whole mixture to a boil, then reduced it to a simmer until the potatoes were softened. At this point, we're going to put our bread into the oven at 350 degrees and cook that for 30 minutes while we prep the sauce to go into the soup. For the sauce, we melted 3 tablespoons of butter, cooked in a 1/4 cup of flour until brown, and then we added 1 cup of heavy cream, brought it to a boil, reduced the heat, stirred until thick, and then poured that whole mixture into our potato soup. Now we're adding in 2 cups of cheddar cheese and salt and pepper to taste. Another mistake we made here is we put in way too much pepper, so slowly add that salt and pepper until you've got it right. Going to portion out everyone's bowls so that we can enjoy dinner. As you can see from the window behind us, it is dark outside. This has been quite a day, making breakfast, lunch, and dinner from scratch. On top of that, I also did the dishes. That was part of the agreement to my wife for us making this video, since we dirtied so many pots and pans along the way. But it was all worth it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. We really do appreciate you taking your time to watch our videos. On the right is the next video that YouTube thinks that you'll enjoy. You should click it. Go ahead. Click it.